Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Tech Topics in the Acropolis series. In this episode, we're going to go over cluster maintenance, such as shutting down a node, rebooting a node, accessing the nodes through IPMI, and shutting down the whole cluster. So with Acropolis, the most important thing to remember is that both the hypervisor and the CVM management stacks are aligned. What I mean by this is that in vCenter, or vSphere, we have the ESX host, the CVMs, and your VMs. The CVMs you manage through Prism, ESXi you manage through your virtualization interface, such as vCenter. If it was Hyper-V, you'd use SCVMM or Hyper-V Manager. With Acropolis, on the other hand, you manage your VMs and your CVM both through Prism on the CVMs. So let's go take a look and see what that looks like. So we're going to be talking about how to perform maintenance on the cluster. So first thing I want to show is that Prism is your only interface into these VMs. So I mentioned that earlier when the whiteboard there, but this is important to note because once the cluster is shut down, you won't be able to access Acropolis. So you'll have to SSH the CVMs or use the hosts. So let's take a look here at how we'd shut down a host. So say I need to bring host 3 down for maintenance. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an SSH session here, point it at one of the CVMs. I'm going to go into aCLI. Here in aCLI, I can enable maintenance mode. And now we see if we do host.getMaintenance mode, we now see that it is in maintenance mode. Compare that to one of the other ones, we see that they're in normal mode. So now Wookie 3, or my host 3 here, is ready to be powered off. So now I can SSH to that host and do a shutdown or a reboot. And now, if you look at the cluster status here, we can see that 12 is now down. Now, it's important to put it in maintenance mode before you perform the shutdown. This is because maintenance mode will make all the VMs on that host be migrated away and won't put any new VMs on there. So it's very important to do that. Now, another important thing to note is that what if this host didn't come back online? Well, we can use the IPMI interface to access it and see what the current state is. So if you go to Hardware, Table, and then click on the host in question, you'll see down here on the bottom left the IPs for the different components, the IPMI IP, controller VM IP, and hypervisor IP. In this case, I'm going to go to the IPMI IP. With IPMI setup, you can get a console view of the host. So we get this Java launcher. You can see here that he's pretty much all the way booted back up now. Another thing you can do here from the IPMI window is if you go to Remote Control, Power Control, you can turn off the server in many different ways, or power on the server if it's powered off. This is important if your host, whether it be AHV, ESX, or Hyper-V, crashes. For example, with an ESX PSOD, you'd want to come to this window so you could get a view of what the error was before you restarted it. Anyway, so now if we log in here, we can see that the CVM is running, so it's currently coming up. This process takes a little while for the CVM to fully come up. We can monitor it by going directly to that CVM and doing a Genesis status. As you can see, he's just barely come up, so we're waiting for Genesis to start. So as you can see here, the processes are starting to come up. Like in any other Nutanix cluster, cluster status is a great way to get an overview of all the CVMs and all of their current states. Now that the CVM is fully back up, we should go back into aCLI. We see that it's still in maintenance mode, so we should remove that. And that's all there is to maintenance on one host. Say that you now needed to do maintenance across the cluster. For example, there was a scheduled power outage in your data center, or you were moving the cluster to a new location. In that case, it's important to make sure you shut down the cluster correctly and power it back up correctly. So the first thing you want to do when you're doing this is first power off all your VMs. So you go here to the web console, to VM, table, and then power off all your VMs here. As you can see, I don't have any, so I don't have to take that extra step. However, you likely will have many VMs. Next, we're going to want to stop the cluster. This stops any processes from running on the CVMs except for Genesis and Zookeeper. So if you see here in cluster status at the top, the current state of the cluster is start. So we're going to change that to stop, where the cluster stop. It's going to ask me to confirm that I want to shut down this cluster. This is because by running this, it will turn off all access to storage, which can be very detrimental to any running VMs. It's now going through turning off the services. As you can see now, only Zeus and Genesis are running, and the state of the cluster is stop. However, Prism is no longer available. We're no longer able to control the VMs that way. So the next steps will be from the command line, shutting down each of the hosts. So by running host IPs, I can see all of the IPs in the cluster. I SSH to one of them, remembering to use the root username. We can also do this through IPMI. As you can see, there's two options for powering off through IPMI. Orderly shutdown sends the shutdown command to the OS. Immediate is the same thing as pulling the power cord. And I will actually do this through IPMI for the other ones too. If you're doing it from the command line, it's important to use the -H. Otherwise, it will just go down to a single user mode. So now we've powered off the cluster. As you can see here, the host is currently off, and currently off. If we go to the home page, we can see down here the host is currently off. So now you're able to perform your power maintenance or move the cluster. After moving the cluster, you need to power back on. So you're going to come in here and click on the power on button. And you'll do this on all of the nodes. We can also do it here from the IPMI viewer itself. We see you go into a system initializing state here. This means the server is booting up. This is BIOS. So we'll give it about 5-10 minutes for the system to come up. As you can see, this host is now coming up. So we do a verse list. We can see that the CVM is running. So now we can probably SSH back to it now. We're getting this Genesis error because Genesis isn't fully up on this node yet. So we'll give it another couple of minutes. Okay, so as you can see, now Genesis is up. However, we're still waiting for 12 to come up. Also, the cluster remembers its state. It is currently in a stop state. So before we can do anything, we're going to need to start the cluster. And we'll do that once 12 comes up. Okay, now all of our nodes are up, so we can issue the cluster start command. And there we go. All of the services are now running back on the cluster. We can now access Prism to manage the VMs and power them back on, getting your system back online. And we're back.
And so that's how you do basic maintenance. As you can see, it's fairly similar to what you're used to with a couple of little tweaks. Just want to drive home again that with aCLI or Hyper-V, you've got your virtualization management interface and your Prism interface. With AHV, they're one and the same, which means that you've got to do everything through the controller VMs. Thanks for joining us on this Acropolis video. I hope you check out the next videos we're coming out with, which should be out soon. Have a great day.